Uh, Hi, that is Bryce. Hold
Hey,
on.
hey, Bryce, I'm doing good, man. How's it going?
Doing good. So the Chris Brown situation is crazy. I guess they're trying to figure out what really happened. Obviously, I'm not sure. Well, I'm not sure what I guess what's happening now, but luckily, nothing crazy went down. But a quick point though. I wanted to ask you. Remember you talked about equality and talked about income and how us black people are poor.
Mm-hmm.
Remember when Bernie Sanders talked about black people being poor and
Yep.
he got criticized black people for saying that. And I never understood why people said that, that he don't get it. But he did get it because he was explaining the situation. But
Yep.
do you think that Bernie Sanders' policies would have helped black people out of poverty, or at least get us to a better point? Do you think his policies, what his proposing, would have helped? Would have did that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I wouldn't have supported him if I didn't believe so, right? I believe that that was the case because of just what I know to be true about economic policies that we have hit the working class, both black and white and other, with over the last few years. I also know that what Bernie Sanders was presenting was actually something that was highly beneficial across the board. And yeah, so no, I absolutely believe his policies would have helped the black community, mainly because his policies would have helped every community. And we put so much emphasis on, should we get reparations as a black community? Well, here's the thing: Bernie Sanders' policies would have been an indirect windfall for the black community as a matter of percentage, right? If we increase minimum wage to $15 an hour, then that is going to have a disproportionate effect on the African American community because so many African Americans are dependent on that minimum wage, right? If we make college free, that would have a disproportionate effect on the black community because there's a lot of African Americans who, while they may be aspiring to the middle class, they're still stuck in between making too much money to get any assistance and not enough money to send their children to school for free, or not to send their kids to school. So in an indirect way, it would have been a de facto reparations for the black community because of the current economic condition of the black community. So yeah, too long didn't read. Absolutely, I think Bernie Sanders' policies would have definitely helped out the black community because it would have helped out all of the working class communities. It would have helped out all the impoverished communities. And despite what Angela Rye from CNN said this morning, despite what Ann Reid wants to say, despite what Charles Blow and all these other well-paid journalists want to say, more African Americans are living below the two times the poverty line. More than 50% make less than 45,000 a year. Period. Right? I mean, more than 50% make less than 45,000 a year. Now, you tell me if some of these basic working class ideas that Bernie Sanders and progressives in general present would have been a indirect form of reparations to the black community because so many of us are being hit across the head. All right, so breaking news now. Debbie Wasserman Schultz has won the primary in Florida District 23. She was running against Tim Canova. Tim Canova, who has been a guest on the show. I don't have the official numbers yet, and of course the numbers will fluctuate through the night until they have settled down. But they are projecting Debbie Wasserman Schultz to be the winner. Chances are, I'm going to be honest with you, chances are one way or the other, Debbie Wasserman Schultz was going to be fine. I think Debbie Wasserman Schultz is probably going to end up working in the Clinton cabinet as some type of junior officer. I'm sorry, let me leave Debbie alone. So it's a good possibility that seat will come open again anyway, and we'd have to replace her in that fashion. But for now, celebrations are in place in the Democratic establishment because they have been able to push back yet again another progressive challenger to the establishment in the form of Tim Canova. Tim will, we'll get him next time, man. Best of luck to what you're going to do in your next move. You fought a good race. I think you fought a really good race, a really competitive race. You raised some really competitive dollars, but the establishment has another notch on their belt. But, that's not the end of the revolution. It's not the end of the movement, of the progressive movement. So the question is, what's next? Who's next up to bat? That's the question. If you have anything you want to talk about in regards to that, 857-600-0518. We are back live on the air on YouTube. We had a little hiccup there, and I know quite a few people watch us live on YouTube, so I wanted to make sure we got you back running. So thanks for your patience. A couple of other headlines I want to cover before we get into okay, so here's some of the data. So some of the polling results for Debbie Wasserman. So Debbie Wasserman got 57.5% to Canova's 42.5%. I want to know the total turnout, but that's a pretty strong representation or turnout for Debbie Wasserman. About 15 points according to the AP, a 15-point spread for Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So that's a very firm, what President Obama would call a shellacking. Yep, there you go. I'm not going to add any other commentary on top of that. Moving on. In other news, last but not least, and again, anything that we've covered so far, you're free to call in to discuss. 857-600-0518. So here's the last thing I want to talk about in the headlines. And this one actually has something to do with Donald Trump, but I think it's worthwhile. On my screen, I have on my screen, I have an image of Albert Einstein, and the famous quote that is attributed to him in Sanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So Huffington Post and YouGov.com have released the results of their online survey, which shows that a plurality, the majority of Republicans have buyer's remorse with Donald Trump. 54% of Republicans now believe that Donald Trump was not the GOP's best option. And this was from their data in August. In August, 35% believe that he was the best option, and 54% believe that he was not their best option. As compared to June, it was an even split. 44% believed that he was the GOP's best option. 44% believed that he was not. That has been a dramatic shift since June, and it can only be attributed to the fact that Donald Trump has not shifted for the general election. And I said this in June. I forgot when I said this, but I've said this several times. To me, I suspected by how insane Donald Trump was acting. I floated early on that, man, he's really here just to sabotage the Republican Party. But the way I was going to make my conclusion on that was whether or not Donald Trump shifted for the general election. And for the first few months of the general election, Donald Trump did not shift at all. In fact, he actually doubled down on the stupid and the offensive and the bigoted. And I think at that point, the Republicans were perfectly fine with entertaining his bigotry for whatever reason. Whoever was going to win, let them win in the primaries. And of course, he's not insane. He's going to shift in the primary, in the general election, back to the center and become more moderate. He didn't do that. And so it looks as though between the primaries and the general election, the first few months of the general election, the Republican Party had buyer's remorse. And now 54% of the people say that of Republicans and Republican-leaning voters say that they believe that Donald Trump was not the best solution. Here's the problem with that. If you dig down into the remaining results, even though 54% of the people of Republicans say they would not have picked Donald Trump, or they don't believe Donald Trump is the best solution, which is a totally different, the latter. He was not the best solution for the Republican Party. Only 29% of them said that they would still vote for Donald Trump again. So 29% of the 54% say that of all those people who have been surveyed said that they would vote for Donald Trump again, which is still the plurality, right? That's still the largest amount out of everyone else that was surveyed. They could not decide on any of the other 16 candidates that were given to them. So the closest was Ted Cruz at 15%. So you have an entire party, right, with a margin of error. You have an entire party that has buyer's remorse, but yet and still they cannot decide on if they would take any of their other choices. Ted Cruz comes in at the closest, which is still behind by a whopping 14 points at 15%, say that they would have chosen Cruz. 14% said that they would have chosen Marco Rubio, and all the remaining candidates had less than 10%, which directly mirrors what happened in the primaries. So even after their experience with Donald Trump doubling down on his ignorance, making a mockery, an even greater mockery of the Republican Party than it already was, really running the Republican Party into the ground, even after realizing all of this, Donald Trump still would win if they had a do-over. I mean, think about that. Knowing full well that Donald Trump is sabotaging their party, Donald Trump would still win in a do-over, even though 54% of Republican-leaning voters think that he was the wrong choice. Doing the same exact thing, expecting a different result. It speaks to the problem, the deeper problem that the Republican Party has for the future. They're so divided and so fractured that someone like Donald Trump is able to come in and solidify that nativist base, that nihilist base, that xenophobic base, and just those people who believe what he's saying in terms of America is going to be great again. Those people who long for the 1950s iteration of America. That's a huge problem for America in general. And I'll tell you why I say it like that. Because without a viable second major party, there is no counterbalance to hold the Democrats accountable. And as George W. Bush said, he feared that he may be the last Republican president in his lifetime. And that becomes a huge problem because without a viable counterbalance, the Democrats can continue to run anybody they want to run and beat the Republican Party, which puts them in a position where they don't have to be held accountable to any constituency, because when you compare the alternative, someone like Donald Trump, it's completely asinine and ridiculous. And considering that they, even in a do-over, will still have picked Donald Trump, that shows you that the party is so divided, even at their worst moment, and even in a moment of clarity where they realize they made the wrong choice, they're still too broken to make a better choice. It's almost like the force of inevitability. They are inevitably going to crash and burn, which leaves us at the mercy of a party that doesn't have to be accountable to anyone because the other major party in the United States has completely lost its way. If we're going to have a duopoly, then we have to have a strong second party, because they're not even the opposite sides of the same coin anymore. They are quite literally one party that is viable and one party that has completely lost its shit. And so that leaves the Democrats free to not be held accountable to their base, not be held accountable to progressives, not be held accountable to their constituency, because as long as the Republicans keep doing the same exact thing, expecting a different result, coming out with the insanity that is Donald Trump, who's going to really hold the Democrats accountable? Or who is going to challenge the Democrats so that they would hold themselves accountable to their constituency? All right. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question?
Yeah, it's Jade, and I have an observation about Tim Canova.
Yeah, what's your observation? What were your thoughts on that race or on him in general?
Yeah, I've been donating to him since Bernie put out his first email supporting him, and I'm really honored to have donated to him. But I don't want to get caught up in feeling down that he lost. So I just wanted to ask you, do you think is it a good strategy to now switch the focus on the candidates that have already won their primaries, like Zephyr Teachout and other candidates?
I mean, I think that's the only strategy, in a certain extent. Like, we obviously we want to look forward to 2018, 2020, but there are some pretty progressive voices that have, they won their primaries. And I would most certainly say, if that's, yeah, I mean, obviously those are victories that can still be won. So whoever is feeling a little disillusioned because of tonight, throw your energy and your phone calls and your support behind someone like Zephyr Teach Out, and get behind her, help her win, along with several others. But that's the immediate result, the immediate action. I would say the very next action would be to start planning, not only for the 2018 election, but joining some of these grassroots, some of these movement-styled activists and activism and movements, right? Community-based movements, and start making a change immediately through movement activism, and then let that emerge into electoral politics. And I think maybe that's one of the number one things we did wrong. We started with the presidential level, and then we circled back and went to some of the congressional races and then some of the local races. But we started with our emphasis on Bernie Sanders, and then we came backwards and down to maybe some grassroots movement. And I would say we should learn from that lesson and start with the grassroots movement, some of the local activism that is really changing the scene, particularly like in Chicago. Some of the things happen in Chicago are completely separate from the Our Revolution, the Bernie Sanders thing, and they had the capacity to underscore and support electoral politics. But if we start right now and we put our energy locally and show the people that we're not just interested in putting somebody in the White House, we're interested in changing it from the ground up, then those people, when 2018 comes around, would be just as committed to your candidate as you were committed to them. So most certainly, go ahead out and support the candidates that are still in the race, that won their primaries. But also I want you to get involved locally. I think it's a good idea and a good move to get involved locally. Thanks for the call, caller. A strong turnout for a completely overspent unknown. Okay. One more caller before I get to two stories that I have to cover. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question?
Hey, David. Just wanted to kind of tie those two topics together, the local versus presidential, and what you were talking about earlier with the Democrats being the only party of significance possibly on the presidential level. All politics is local, and I think that a lot of times that's lost in the conversation. So, as much as the Democrats are overpowering in the presidential level, the Republicans have the majority of governorships. They have, the majority of local offices throughout the country, and so when we're looking at change and we see so much being done opposing progressivism, I think that's a core point that we need to focus on, is that we may have a Democrat, and obviously not someone we call progressive in office, depending on who it is, but that's not going, the Democrats aren't necessarily the answer, which we already know, but just having the Democrats in power doesn't mean that things aren't going to continue to move to the right.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. And I think that's the reality that we live in, and that's what we're facing. So thanks, David, for that call, man, and that insight. Last two stories of the night are actually the two that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. One that got carried over from last night. But let me start with the story about Apple. This is an important story. And it's important because we have this debate, this ongoing debate about how we should tax our corporations and at what level should we tax our corporations. So the European Union's competition enforcer has ordered that Ireland collect $14.5 billion in taxes from Ireland. There was a court order. The court order is for taxes that was calculated based on the last 10 years. And based on the last 10 years, Apple owes Ireland $14.5 billion. The irony of this is, in fact, that Ireland actually doesn't want to collect this. Ireland wants to keep Apple paying the pittance of taxes that they're paying. To give you perspective of how little Apple is actually paying in Ireland, the effective tax rate here in the United States, let's say, is probably around 27, 25% in that ballpark. One of the excuses for that many corporations use for a tax inversion, right? Having a pretty much a shell company overseas with which they do all their paperwork and they channel their profits through there. One of the reasons for that is because they want to search the globe for the lowest corporate tax rate they possibly can. And so they were lured to Ireland for a tax rate of, I believe it's 14%. Yeah, it's around 14% was the tax rate that lured them to Ireland. In actuality, their effective tax rate in Ireland was 0.0005%. Let's say that again, 0.0005%. Apple was paying 50 euros in taxes for every $1 million in profits. I need that to sink in for you, right? So depending on the exchange rate, I think the euro is pretty weak right now, right? So based on the exchange rate, I'm paying more taxes on a monthly basis for my little ridiculous salary than Apple pays for $1 million in profits. I know it's not apples to apples, but I want you to kind of just get the idea. You know, my monthly tax bill for my salary is more than what Apple pays per 1 million euros. And while we have this argument over how much we should pay or charge corporations, what our tax rate should be, the reality of it is that corporations are not going around the country, around the world looking for the lowest tax rate. They're going around the world looking for no tax rate. They are going to do everything they possibly can to pay nothing or effectively nothing in taxes. And while we keep justifying this perpetual race to the bottom, the reality of it is that we lose. And by we, I mean society, the government that the people make up, the people that make up the government, we the people, we lose because we have entities that are in our midst, corporations, that are able to extract all of the profits that they can muster and organize to extract from this society, from our country, and they have zero social responsibility to that country. Apple benefits from America just as much as you and I, even more so in terms of the wealth that they generate by virtue of the profits that they make off of Americans. They get an even greater benefit from America than you and I, but they pay nothing back into this society. And I know somebody's going to say, yeah, well, they employ people. All right, so in Ireland, they employ about 6,000 people, right? And they paid basically nothing to Ireland. But 6,000 jobs in Ireland is a big deal, right? 6,000 jobs is a big deal because Ireland is a smaller nation. But the reality of it is they're doing Ireland no big favor by employing these people because Apple cannot operate without the people that they hire. They're not doing that's not an excuse that you're creating jobs. You need to create these jobs so that you can create the profits. The reality of it is you're not going to create one. If you're a good corporatist, if you're a good capitalist and a good CEO, you are not going to create one additional job that is necessary to generate the level of profits that you want to generate. So saying that you're coming to create jobs is not something that you're doing for us. It's something that you're doing for your business so that you can generate these profits. Creating jobs so that you can create profits does not constitute the type of social contribution that is deserved from an organization or entities that is able to extract such tremendous wealth on the same roads that we drive on, with the same national security that we are afforded, with the same public schools that we send our kids to. They extract wealth from those of us who work 9-to-5 jobs. We buy their products because their products are in our faces every single day, everywhere we go. They derive a tremendous benefit from our society without giving anything back to our society, because people honestly believe that the best thing for us to do is to lower our taxes, because if we don't lower our taxes, then they're going to go to Ireland and get 14%. Well, the reality of it is they bitch slapped Ireland as well, and Ireland has gotten less than 1%, far less than 1%, 50 euros on a million euros. I am paying more taxes than Apple is paying as a percentage of my income than Apple is paying to Ireland. And so Ireland is due $14.5 billion in taxes, and we're stuck in this inevitable cycle of the race to the bottom because someone with their trickle-down theory and their supply-side economics says that we should just cut taxes to stimulate growth. Well, the inevitable question is, how low are you going to cut them? Because at a certain point, you're going to cut them so low that two things happen. One, you're not going to be able to stimulate growth with that model anymore. And then two, you have starved your society of deriving any benefit from organizations and entities that derive all of their benefit from us. Think of it this way. It's like a marriage. It's like a marriage where one person is able to be free with zero responsibility to the household, to go and do whatever they want. They can have their career. They can have their second career. They're free to do anything and everything they want, and they make all the money that they want, and they leave their other spouse, their significant other, home, responsible for everything that's happening in that home. And yet at the end of the month, they look at each other and say, hey, babe, why didn't you pay rent this month? Babe, why didn't you keep the lights on? Babe, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? All the while, they're the ones free to go and benefit from that relationship. We're in a broken relationships with corporations. We are in a very abusive relationship with corporations, and it's because our leaders believe and have bought into this neoliberal economic paradigm that says that we need to lower taxes no matter what. We need to lower taxes because we believe that's going to stimulate growth, and because we're in competition globally with other nations that are going to lower their taxes. Well, the question is, are we going to compete with 0.0005% tax rate with Ireland? We have reached the bottom of that race to the bottom. Last but not least, something that I wanted to cover last night, something that I'm finding myself more and more passionate about on a regular basis. But before I start, let me put it in context. Let me place this in a historical context, because nothing is new. And as much as I often ask the question about if what we're facing today is unique, the reality of it is this is kind of nothing is new under the sun. It's one of those things. And what am I talking about? So in 1797, a gentleman by the name of James Callender. Now on your screen, I have Thomas Jefferson, but you'll see why in a moment. A gentleman by the name of James Callender writes a piece entitled "The History of the United States for 1796." And contained in this piece was a smear, an account of an affair, an illicit affair that was had by a scandal that would end the political career of Alexander Hamilton. Callender wrote the piece on behalf and to help Thomas Jefferson, who was Alexander Hamilton's political rival at the time. Callender was essentially a propagandist for Thomas Jefferson. He was Thomas Jefferson's stooge, working on behalf of the party at the time was referred to as the Democratic Republican Party. One name, one party, two names, one party. And the purpose of Callender was working and writing this was to help Thomas Jefferson fight back against the Federalists. All right, so at the same time, you had the Federalist newspapers who were relentlessly going after Thomas Jefferson and going against his political ideology of states' rights and his approach to the government being led by states' rights versus federal government and a strong central government. You had basically two propaganda machines that were being mobilized for political purposes, that were wallowing in the mud like nothing the country had ever seen, because that was the beginning of our nation. Both of these political parties, both of these leaders and these figures were leveraging their influence with their press, their friends in the press, in order to get negative coverage for their opponent. The reality of it is political journalism has been a part of our everyday life since the beginning of America. And the reason I bring up political journalism is because of the impact and the shift and this unique situation that we have now, where I firmly believe that people look at political propaganda and they don't view it as a biased source. But we're at the point where people actually believe that these sources that are clearly propagandistic, clearly, biased, they look at these sources to be unbiased. And the only source that they trust is the source that's feeding them something that confirms their biases. Now, I put up a man on your screen who, if you look at his hairdo, he looks like he very well could have been working for Thomas Jefferson or Alexander Hamilton. I pulled up on the screen an image of David Brock. David Brock is the equivalent of James Callender. David Brock is to Hillary Clinton what James Callender was to Thomas Jefferson. David Brock is Hillary Clinton's political hitman. He has been working with the Democratic Party, particularly the Clinton branch of the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party, for a very long time, since the Monica Lewinsky, just after the Monica Lewinsky affair. And I bring him up and I pull light and focus onto the so-called Democratic, so-called progressive, left-leaning media, because for years, many of us assumed that this type of political delusions only happened on the right. We believed that people looked at Fox News as some unbiased type of journalism, and we made a mockery of them for many years because we were like, how can they not realize what they're consuming is straight propaganda? And so there's really no need for me to highlight the problems of propaganda and people buying into that propaganda on the right, because we already believe that. We already know that, and we can see that with a clear eye. But so many people are oblivious, or intentionally oblivious, to the propaganda that we have been fed on the left on a regular basis. And one of the good things about the only good thing, in my opinion, that has come out of this election, or one of the good things, has been the reality that we are more sober today about the propaganda that surrounds us, even if that propaganda confirms what we believe. We still have to know that we're being fed propaganda. And the reason, again, that I'm pointing this out is because you have major news outlets, and by major, I mean major on the internet scale. You have major outlets like Blue Nation Review, which is owned by David Brock and is managed, and one of the leading voices at Blue Nation Review is this gentleman, Peter Dow. Peter Dow is a name worth mentioning because he relentlessly leads the charge at Blue Nation Review in order to right now spin a narrative that any critique or criticism of Hillary Clinton is grounded and rooted in misogyny and sexism. This is almost the express agenda of the Blue Nation Review platform right now. During the primaries, their express agenda was to sow a narrative that Bernie Sanders had a race problem. And now their sole agenda has been to declare that any criticism of Hillary Clinton, I will repeat it to be expressly clear, any criticism of Hillary Clinton is grounded and rooted in misogyny and sexism. And it doesn't stop with Blue Nation Review. It continues on to the Daily Beast. It continues on to MSNBC with figures like Ann Reid. And it really does pain me to have to constantly talk about a couple of key figures, because you start off with respect for people until they show you that they're no longer worthy of your respect. In a piece for the Daily Beast, Ann Reid asserts that Hillary Clinton has this need and has a right and is justified. That's the word I'm looking for. Hillary Clinton is justified in not being subjected to the pressures of the press because of how vigorous and how untrusting the press is of Hillary Clinton. So on the one hand, you have the Blue Nation Review setting up that anyone who criticizes Hillary Clinton is based in sexism and misogyny. You have people like Ann Reid who are justifying the fact that Hillary Clinton has not had a press conference in over 200 days. And this is a person who's running for the highest office in our nation and the most powerful position in the world. And they feel that it is justified for her not to be subjected to press conferences because journalists view her through the lens of suspicion. This is political journalism. This is propaganda. This is intentionally targeted not to direct you towards the truth, but to direct you towards a position whereby you no longer resist the decisions that are being made by someone who they like. And it works wonders if they are somebody who you like. But if this was somebody that we disagreed with, if this was Donald Trump, who had not done a press conference for 253 odd days, if this was Donald Trump, who based every bit of criticism against him in some type of, I don't know what he could call, but Donald Trump in those shoes, if he was your political rival doing the same exact thing, we would call him out in an instance. And in fact, you have some voices like Matt Iglesias at Vox, who not only called out Trump, but in past times has called out Hillary Clinton for the very things he's now justifying. So the question I had to ask myself is that, do these people really believe what they're saying? Are they committed? Do they believe in what they're saying so much that they cannot see that they are propagandists serving a political agenda to the disservice of their art of journalism, of their science of journalism, their profession of journalism, and a disservice to the people? Or are they knowingly and willingly spending every opportunity they can to subvert, in my opinion, very much so, subvert opposition, which is a cornerstone of our democracy? But more importantly than the people who are very likely propagandists, like James Callender was for Thomas Jefferson, more importantly is the reality that people buy this. They buy into this. They believe this stuff. And they believe that it is unbiased journalism. They believe that their source of news is the only unbiased source of news. They believe that there is a mainstream media, but conservatives don't believe that Fox News is the mainstream media. Conservatives believe that Fox News is somehow the exception to the rule. Likewise, you have a lot of liberals who believe that MSNBC is not the mainstream media. Fox News is the mainstream media. And so we create these echo chambers by which we surround ourselves with things that we want to hear, and we never allow ourselves to hear or even entertain a modicum of criticism of our candidate, ultimately undermining the very principles of democracy and allowing ourselves and preparing ourselves for a time where we voluntarily we voluntarily turn over our system into the hands of something far more nefarious not because we were forced to, not because someone came in and took over, not because there was a coup, not because there was an existential threat to America. No, because we very voluntarily turned over our liberties because it confirmed what we wanted to hear. That's probably all I need to say about that. If you didn't get it, rewind it and listen again. Just make sure that you can delineate the difference between unbiased journalism and political journalism, and realize that there are people who are paid really good money to vacillate between both worlds, so that on one day they can claim to be a journalist, an unbiased journalist without a horse in the race, and on the next day they can be a political journalist pushing a very specific and intentional narrative that benefits the people who benefit them. I'll talk to you guys next time.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
Hey, patrons, remember to go over to patreon.com/The BPD Show and get today's bonus show. You guys have a great night.